Hi, my name is Conetzkey. I'm the publisher of the Des Moines Business Record. We're here today to have a conversation about land in the Des Moines market. What we're doing today is putting together a conversation that we're going to feature in the April 26th issue of Commercial Real Estate. The annual magazine will be out and inserted into the Business Record. The conversation today, we've got a great group with us. Darr, our senior staff writer, is going to kick off the conversation here today. But with us are our panelists, and with us today we have Aimee Staudt, she's the Director of Development for Knapp Properties. Reynolds, the owner of Reynolds Urban Design and Urban Planning. Curtis Brown, the Assistant City Manager and the Director of Economic Development for the City of Urbandale. And Nick Halfhill, President of Landmark Development Services. In today's conversation, you're going to see Kent, he's going to be writing down and taking notes for the article that we're going to be writing. So from this point forward, we're not going to be looking into the camera, we're going to be having a discussion amongst ourselves. And with that, Kent, I'm going to have you go ahead and kick things off.
Nick, I'll start with you, and we'll just go down the line with this first question. Do you see any themes emerging for 2019?
I think in general for 2019, we're still coming out of, or we're in the middle of, or at some point in a really strong session with real estate. Over the past probably 6 or 8 months, we've noticed a little bit of slowdown, but it's nothing that we're reacting to. So at this point, it's somewhat business as usual. From our company standpoint, we have several new developments that are underway, and our plans are to continue with mixed use. I think if there's anything, themes these days is to keep our eye on the paradigm that shifts with all of the different changes in retail and how the commercial aspects kind of impact how people live and where people live. So if there's any themes, probably keeping our eye on the needle there.
I think high quality, market sensitive development. So I think we're seeing developers and businesses read the market and look at what are the opportunities that the public sector is putting out there, whether it's incentives or the state of Iowa just opened up again another round for their certified sites program. And then also, I think developers are looking at what are some of the market trends, maybe toward smaller lots for lower price points. And so you're seeing some response to that as well. So from where I sit, I think it'll be another good year of high quality development, but that's carefully judging the market.
Yeah, I like both of those comments. I see it in terms of maturing. We've come out of a really difficult time, and we've stabilized. We've kind of taken advantage maybe of the low-hanging fruit. So now where do we go next in a very thoughtful and intentional way that helps the city of Des Moines continue to have the success that it's had in the past 10 years?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything that's been said here. I agree with what Nick said as far as business as usual, with maybe a little bit more caution than, a little bit more sensitivity to some headwinds. And maybe that's more nationally, from the news perspective. Des Moines as a market continues to be really strong. We're doing a lot of really great things throughout our city. You're continuing to see the secondary sort of markets be very desirable from a investment perspective for institutions. So I think those are all things working in our favor, but just a little bit of caution maybe from a national perspective.
Nick said earlier, and many people have said this, that we're kind of an economy of ripples. We don't get smacked down by the big waves, but what could be? What could happen on the national scene or international scene that would send that big wave our direction?
I think the easy one is interest rates. If they really get out of hand, suddenly affordability for the purchaser as well as the ability for the developer to have the pro forma to work properly with the cost of money. So I think that's something that we all really keep our eye on, and that's probably where cautious attitudes come from. Is we've got to be sure stuff in the pipeline can survive a little bump in the interest rates.
What type of a rate would start to cause concern or cause you to worry?
Yeah,
don't know if there's necessarily a threshold. I just know, I mean, from a single family development, you know, there's always like this triangle. And so your pool of buyers that can afford a home, you know, it's just like a triangle. If you're at this price point, you got, you know, everybody can afford it. If you're at this price point, you know, you're starting to narrow your market. And so obviously interest rates play a factor into all of that. We haven't really seen a ton of, we've seen some movement on lot sizes and maybe house square footages where people are willing to sacrifice quality and maybe go to a little bit smaller footprint. You know, we really haven't seen buyers want to, I guess home buyers or even apartment dwellers really want to scale back on their finishes and amenities and some of those things. And so, you know, you're kind of in that sort of catch-22 of we're trying to bring home prices down and, you know, apartment rents down, but people aren't wanting to sacrifice some of the things that maybe that would take. And so, you know, interest rates just add another layer to that.
Right. From our development pro formas, that they're obviously very reactive to interest rates. That's part of the equation, but probably as fast as we react to that issue, homeowners or buyers, business owners are reacting to that issue a little bit faster than we need to. So the market's going to be affected as quick as we can, you know, kind of figure out what we're doing with our business plan. But to stack onto we're talking about trends, and that smaller lot, that is a big trend I kind of overlooked. But by and large, the builders are hearing from, you know, we all react to the end user, and the end user is trying to figure out what they can get for $1 in whatever, you know, version of that dollar. And by and large, over the, you know, really the last 50 years, but definitely the last 15 or 20 years around the Des Moines Metro, we've been trying to figure out what that next paradigm is. And I don't know that we're there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting into the 55 foot wide lot being a little bit more normal, whereas 65 was the standard for really the better part of probably 40 years. So what that does, it makes the land more valuable, more attainable for that house. But if you think about how much infrastructure is in front of that lot, that's really, it's not the square foot of dirt, it's how much road you have in front of it. So 10 more feet of road, 10 more feet of sewer, of water, another hydrant. That's really where it stacks up to the value of the end user. So when we're talking about attaining a value of a house, and that's really what we're all chasing, is whether it's, you know, it was 200 at one point, now it's 250, or it's trying to figure out how to knock $10,000 or $20,000 or 5 or 10% out of that home.
Are cities resistant to that? Because it wasn't the definition of a single family residential in Des Moines anyway, was it just meant a 60-foot wide lot. I think that's basically what it meant.
A lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them, right. But
To me, it puts a premium on the design aspect. When you've got a smaller lot and you've got this high expectation for quality that's not expressed in just sort of big, simple square footage, it's expressed in quality of the spaces, the quality of the light, the finishes, all those experiences that it provides. So as we get smaller and more efficient, which I think is smart, it also means we have to be smarter about how we design these neighborhoods.
And speaking of neighborhood design, I think what we're seeing is a mix. So a plat will come in, and there'll be a portion of the plat that'll be reserved for townhouses or a more moderate lot size, something like that. So mixing it up perhaps more than what's done in the past.
Yeah.
Is it the development driving it to the smaller lots themselves, or is user preference ultimately going that route too, or is it coming from both sides?
I got two sets of kids with families in their 30s, and they have no interest in mowing the yard.
Been there.
You know, and they'd much rather take a walk to the park if they want to play catch or do something. So the yard is a liability for them. So yeah, I think the buyers are saying, I just don't need it, you know. I want to spend my time doing other things.
So we're talking about people, and one of the questions you asked was what might happen, and they mentioned interest rates, but from the economic development perspective, it's interesting, our conversations with businesses about workforce. I mean, workforce is the #1 thing we talk about, and in Iowa we just need more people, but we are not we're not seeing a disinvestment in workforce. Companies are working hard to retain their employees. They're investing in training workers, and so far we're seeing continued hiring. And so wealth generation is the engine that keeps this going and allows people to buy houses and reinvest. And I think so long as we're seeing good opportunities for earning a great wage here in Des Moines, in the area, it seems like that's going to bode well for the rest of this year. If we start to see businesses slow down on investments or taper off hiring, that would be a concern from my point of view.
Before they're looking for land or an infill site or anything, are they asking you about workforce? I mean, is that kind of, sort of what I hear is kind of sort of the first question out of their mouth is am I going to be able to find?
Yeah, it's
people
hand
to
in
do the
hand.
job?
It really is. I mean, I think that's the advantage that the Des Moines Metro has is we've got, this is a great place to live and work. And so a business has to have confidence in the ability to attract the people they need. I suppose you could give away land and buildings all around, but if you don't have the people that they need to work in those spaces, you're missing half the equation. I'd be curious what you all think of that.
I think we all, from a development standpoint, people continually ask me, where are they all coming from?
And that was going to be my next question, by the way.
Yeah, it's a difficult, and I don't think any of us at any one given point know the answer. I think I mentioned to you, Ken, earlier that the speaker that James Chung, who spoke to the partnership recently, or it was a speaker series that came through. But anyway, he had some very good information about where the statistics are adding up, where they are coming from. Folks from, any number of small towns around Iowa, which we all kind of know that. But the infill we see from Chicago or Omaha or Kansas City, and why are they coming in? Well, a lot of that is this recipe we're talking about. It's workforce versus available jobs. It's when the available jobs are created versus that workforce. And we have this pretty good machine working right now with a strong nucleus downtown, which allows everything to really function well. So we're continually chasing at where are the, we're creating homes ultimately, or places to live, neighborhoods. Where are those people coming from? How often are they going to come? So it's reacting to global numbers, but we have an anomaly here that isn't, what you get in every mid-sized town around the Midwest or around the country for that matter. So it's talked often about is how do we keep that going, which is all, kind of what we're all up to. But I think it's interesting to watch.
Absolutely.
Is that how do we keep it going? I mean, is that is that incentive driven? I mean, should it be incentive driven, or is it just based on the sheer strength of the local economy?
I think we have a unique sort of asset in the Greater Des Moines Partnership and all of its members in sort of that regional cooperation. Because, for what it's worth, you look at Des Moines, now maybe they don't have as much growth from a single family perspective, but there's no question that the amenities that they're providing are driving some of the growth that's happening in some of the other locations. And so I think to the extent we can kind of continue to look at it regionally and cooperate regionally, which I think, the partnership has been a great driver of, that's going to continue to be the key to our success. You look at some of the great things that are talked about with the water trails and activating the riverfront, and there's no question that will continue to bring young people. Now, they might not all move to the city of Des Moines, but they're certainly going to come down here and capitalize on those amenities.
Is something as simple as a bridge over the Raccoon River going to be a huge catalyst?
I think it can be.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about what, downtown over the last 25 years or 30 years. There are little things like that add up tremendously. Whereas 25 years ago, coming down here on a bicycle on a Sunday might not have been as advertising as it is now. It's something that you do. I live nowhere near downtown Des Moines. However, I find myself down here on a weekend recreating, not just going to a restaurant, but literally riding a bicycle here from, fairly far far away.
Yeah.
So that's something. And it's those, as to why, it's the partnership. And not only the partnership, but it's all the partnerships working together, whether it's urban economic development, the One Partnership, government entities, developers, all of us having that our eye on the prize, I guess, and knowing where we stand as being part of that. And for a lot of reasons, it's working pretty darn well right now. So whether it's incentives, there are always going to be projects that require incentives, from the land's history to the absolute end user need. But that's almost independent of what creates that good progress. And I think that's partnerships with everybody having a common goal in mind, is to make, we have a pretty good idea of what winning looks like right now, because we're seeing a lot of it.
I think place matters so much. I think we're moving away from the commoditization of developments, whether it's residential or commercial or even business parks. It seems like, and developers, I'd be curious to hear, and especially your perspective, Dennis, from planning and urban design, is there's got to be some unique aspect of the development. And it's so interesting now how you hear the development talked about with the employees in mind. How are they going to get here on their bikes? Are they going to be able to walk their dog over the lunch hour? I mean, it's so interesting to see how the employee is thought of in the design.
It almost takes you back to, say, Kohler in the turn of the century, with a whole community developed around the industry. And likewise, we need to think of our business as being a holistic aspect of our lives. I love how, as you were saying, Amy, the connectedness of this metro area. And if you look at things like the Clyde Greenbelt, which then connects into the Des Moines system, as a terrific start, and how are those other sort of opportunities to physically bind these communities together, as well as on other strategic levels.
Dennis, I have a question for you, and probably something you've all thought about. How does losing the federal courthouse down in the Market District, it seems like a pretty game-changing decision to me. Is it? I mean, what does that set back that effort? I know the city's getting ready to come out with a new plan, I guess, a conceptual plan or something for the Market District, but just in general, what effect does that have?
Well, the upside obviously was there was an opportunity for infrastructure investment, which could have spun off into some other activity. But it came with liabilities too for the district, in terms of all the requirements of the security and blast zones, and as well as just sort of parking requirements that are destination driven, and people that are not going to the courthouse to spend 2 hours in a district. They want to get in there and get out.
We hope not.
Yeah. Some of it, at least, yeah. So I actually think it may be a blessing that we can get a good plan for the district. It's a strategic location. We can be sure the growth happens at the appropriate pace. And I think there's some great ideas in that master plan that really could be a great benefit to us. The whole notion of the festival park as a unique place in our metro area takes pressure off of the sculpture park, which really isn't designed or set up in that sort of function anyway. It allows us to manage traffic and noise and all those things on a beautiful riverfront site. So I'm optimistic that the plan will give us some smart direction in the long term as well as short term. I'll tag up with that too. I was originally one of the people, when I heard the courthouse may go on the YMCA site, I was like, oh darn. And I've done multiple plans for that site over the years.
One of two reasons I asked you that.
Yeah. I've got megabytes of data in my computer on the YMCA site.
Interesting site because it was such a prime spot. Are there where do some of the next prime spots look like even within downtown? Is that there are less spots
Yeah.
for that than there would have been 5, 6, 7 years ago?
You know, hopefully, good planning says you don't consume sites, you create sites. And so as you develop a site, it now makes 2 other sites suddenly prime. And those 2 sites get developed and they create 4 good sites. So hopefully we're being smart about it, and that's what we're doing. I think we've got some good riverfront sites still, and riverfronts are always attractive for lots of good reasons. When you really look at it, there's still lots of creative infill sites. They just need the right numbers to make them work. So I'm not worried about us running out of key sites, certainly. And
When you say make the numbers work, I would imagine cost of the land itself.
yeah, cost of the land. You know,
Is
we've
that something
kind
that
of,
has increased then as a result?
you know, we've chewed through, I think, most of the inexpensive brick warehouses from the 20s and 30s and converted those. So you go to the next level. What's the next type of building type or site? The Bridge District, I think, maybe opened our eyes and says, you know, light industrial stuff from the 70s could be redeveloped in a really strong way. And so I think we continue to sort of be creative where, again, you have to get... My dad always said, I love this saying, he was a golfer, loved golf. You win the match on the first tee, and that means the bet that you make, how many strokes do I have to give you, is going to determine if I win or not. So the terms you set at the very beginning helps decide if it's going to be successful. And that goes for development too. You got to get the land at the right price to make the pro forma work.
I can think of 3 other projects around Greater Des Moines. One is the 100th Street Bridge and the flyover in Urbandale. The other 2 are the proposed Microsoft data center, and it's more than a shot in an arm that it gave to infrastructure development in that area. But then the other is the Apple project in Waukee. Do those spill over? I mean, does that, obviously it's working out pretty well. The 100th Street is working out pretty well for Urbandale. But do big projects like the super big data center projects, are they just out there on their own, or do they have additional benefit that may not be as immediately apparent as possible?
I think the benefit that really comes from it is all the infrastructure that goes with it. And I think, you know, that's particularly apparent from our perspective for the Microsoft data center that helped with the funding of the bridge over Raccoon River and the extension of Veterans Parkway and eventually a future interchange on I-35 for all of that. And so, I mean, that for just us alone opened up 1,800 acres of land that you would have to go through 4 counties, and literally 4 counties, and it would take you 30 minutes to drive on a combination of gravel and pavement to where now you are literally, I don't know, 5 minutes from, say, Glen Oaks area of West Des Moines. So that's just a huge game changer for us, and that's, you know, just the land we own. There's, you know, tens of thousands of acres that opened up for West Des Moines and Warren County.
And it even provided some land for, where's that school district?
Right. Right.
Be able to grow to the
they
north.
start to look at, you know, the growth areas and having an influx of homes come in. And I think same thing with Apple from an infrastructure standpoint and all the different sewer and water improvements that were made because of that. And then, you know, in that particular deal, that also spills over into funding that goes to help Waukee with amenities and parkland and some of those things. So.
Absolutely. I mean, you asked are there spillover effects, and I'd say we cheer them on because all of these projects accrue to the benefit of our entire region. To be able to go out and say, when the Greater Des Moines Partnership or any of us selling the Metro can say, look who's invested here. I mean, those are names that bring immediate attention. It's like having anchors in a mall, you know. It benefits everyone. And then you asked about, does the infrastructure have spillover effects? Absolutely. Aimee gave numerous examples of the data centers, but then also 100th Street and the flyover. just to think of what that infrastructure does for all of the northwest part of the metro, not to mention all the people from around central Iowa who are going to work in those buildings that are there, perhaps due in part to the access that's been created.
Well, to be fair, the flyover might help anyone's commute time in the metro, depending on your route. Just getting through that area.
Yeah, you make the point perfectly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, you know,
Well, would you have built an office building on Plum Drive if it weren't for 100th Street?
well, it is.
I mean, eventually you would
Yeah,
have.
eventually, you know, obviously this is 86th Street exit and 100th Street exit are very close to each other. However, this definitely puts it in the middle of two prime access points, and that's critical. Depending on which side of the world your commuters are coming from, right? Your office folks. So it definitely helps. You know, we also have land near the Apple data center that's just getting out of the ground. While our infrastructure wasn't dependent upon that project, there's another several thousand acres of ground west of Waukee that would say otherwise. So that extension is just it's critical, and really ultimately it's who we're building the, you know, the construction isn't forever. However, you know, really since maybe Microsoft, you know, 10, 12 years ago to Facebook, that's been several years now, our trades are so full and so busy that each one of those folks, and any of us that know a lot of trades people, they went from sitting, call sitting in a union hall to there's no one sitting if you're actively wanting to work. So there's a side benefit, you know, and I won't get into the long-term economics of that. It's kind of outside of that discussion, but ultimately it's end users for us, and there's a lot of end users that are busy right now, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. A great discussion in terms of growth in that, as I was saying, I think we're at that maturity, the next level. When you look at some communities that maybe 20 years ago we all looked at as benchmarks, and some of them maybe are having issues of loss of green space, traffic issues, I think we need to really be proactive in terms of how we manage these big picture issues. Chicago was fortunate in their growth spurts way back that they had the Forest Preserve District system, which allowed these large swaths of natural environments to act as a buffer between the various suburbs. And we don't have a mechanism like that in place. And I guess if I have a concern over the next 10 years is, do we just sort of do this big land grab sprawl, which just creates growth, but also creates the negatives of traffic and all the costs associated with that? Or can we have some strategies that allow it to happen with these other systems in place?
In the case of Chicago, very a lot of forest area.
Yeah.
Strikes me there's not a ton of forest area necessarily between Waukee and West Des Moines, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
what are some strategies that could be out there?
It is, and you're right. It's not. We don't have that natural barrier that says it's wetland, so we're going to jump that area. Right. It's all sort of developable. So I don't have the answer for that. Some of it may be comprehensive planning that gets back to placemaking, that says we're really going to focus on concentrating walkable community centers of retail, business, living, and then some of these other areas are going to be lower density. I mean, there's always a need for recreation fields, and Waukee is a clear example of that. So how can you do your rec fields in such a way that they help sort of preserve some natural ecosystems and a sense of identity, and gets that traffic dispersed in a efficient lacework, not just following down pick your Hickman or pick your corridor that's starting to get overused, right? I mean, we're already seeing that pressure, and you can only add so many lanes, and it doesn't answer the problem.
Amy, don't you have the opportunity to kind of deal with some of those issues with the rec and urban?
We do. We have a pretty extensive forest preservation area there. If you look, and a lot of it is floodplain, but we've worked closely with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation to have both land we've dedicated to them and land in easement there. So, and those are a lot of restrictions on what's happening there. In some ways, it does almost create a buffer from, as you're coming over that bridge, you drive through a pretty extensive stretch of really beautiful woodland forest, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to work together with them to keep that in place.
But our floodplains, whether it be floodplain or not, our floodplains are some of the best natural areas that we have in Iowa.
Yeah.
Frankly, because they weren't farmed, or if they were, they were, forced to remain natural by and large. So that's what we should do with it.
Yeah.
Between all the projects that we've been talking about and the different development areas, I mean, 5-7 years ago, those all didn't exist, and now they do. We're at that point where Kettlestone and project down by you guys, one time with interchange, do you think there'll be additional places where future development are going to start carving out now, or are we in a holding pattern until some of these areas are filling?
Interesting.
If you look at,
I heard, and this is completely a rumor that someone threw out, that there
Like
are,
those
I
that's
mean,
good.
there are multiple data center projects throughout the metro, looking in various places. So all it takes is really one of those to land someplace that's sort of a new area, and then while you have all the construction jobs that come with it for multiple years, you also have all the infrastructure that comes with it. And so while there are, in our mind, not a ton of ancillary uses that a data center brings, it does bring the infrastructure that,
energy.
so I think, from that standpoint,
So that could help
I'd see a
accelerate
few
potentially
Yeah.
new
Right.
new spots when you wouldn't, when you otherwise wouldn't, right?
Record, as a matter of fact. And I'll ask you, Curtis.
What's that?
Not that it was directed towards Urbandale, but how many, are companies incentive shopping? I mean, do you encounter that much? Are you aware of it?
That phrase, I think, might imply something more negative than what might actually be happening. I think that businesses are making and have the right to make wise economic decisions. And so, is there incentive shopping? I think there's definitely comparison of what comes with each site. But ultimately, I don't know. I think the incentives are part of the equation, but only a part. There are the location, the access to workforce, the land or building being the right fit for the personality of the company. All of those things have to be in place, and then the incentive becomes it becomes a way to move the project forward. Because here's the thing, and I wanted to ask the panel this, and I hope we'll get there, about what's different this time than the years leading up to 2008. But it seems like this time, companies are making conservative and wise economic decisions about their investments, and the investments, the incentives rightly should be a part of that consideration. But I think around the metro, companies are honorable and reasonable.
It's an Iowa strength, right? A Des Moines strength. We're not reckless.
That's one of those intangibles that
Yeah.
it's there.
We save our money, we have
Absolutely.
the wise use of our resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the principles are there. We incent good jobs. We don't release something we didn't have. We share the benefit of investment with the companies making those investments. But you're right, it's an Iowa strength. I would agree.
Ken, was it Cedar Rapids that just created the agreements to not steal each other's companies?
Well, and there's one in place also for Greater Des Moines, the Fair Play Agreement.
Exactly.
Is that being followed?
I will say.
But-
Out of curiosity, I mean, it's not that we haven't seen a ton, but.
Has it been redrafted?
Pending.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. But just like I think the managers and owners of the businesses here are honorable and reasonable because they live here too, I would say that our city peers are as well. People in economic development, we take that fair play agreement seriously, and the key principle is that we don't steal. And so I think we all recognize, being in economic development, that businesses have a right to make sound economic decisions. And so that means they can compare sites and buildings and incentives. And I think we have an obligation to provide that information and be even-handed about it as well. But the truth is, it's a good environment to work here. I hope to do business, and I know from practicing local economic development, it definitely is.
If you play out what we were talking about with the data centers, creating potentially more spots in the future, what does that ultimately do then to the land prices in the play? Let's pretend we'll to an extreme that two or three more big data type projects were to come online and that we're opening up new areas. Does that affect the pricing at the places currently?
I think absolutely. If you look at what Apple paid for, like on it, and I'm just using them as an example, for over the entire 200 or however many acres they have out there, 1,000, 12, 2,000 acres.
2,100.
Thank you. If you look at what they paid, I mean, if you're a neighboring landowner, I think that there's your comp. I mean, when Nick or Knapp comes and says, hey, we'd like to make you an offer, they're like, well, 35,000 an acre is what this average, so.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, right. And it does create opportunities maybe for other vectors in the metro area. So the Altoonas and the Norwalks and some of those places that maybe don't get as much attention suddenly become viable.
Well, I would imagine if the 100th interchange area and Altoona didn't have the infrastructure that was set up for, you wouldn't have as many internally competing against whether it's an outside business coming in or not, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's just like it's more than about incentives, it's more than about the price too.
And probably the most unique thing that we're dealing with is, you study urban planning and you try to figure out how people react. Well, we have this anomaly of these huge economic impacts that bring the infrastructure. And that's outside of what we learned to try to react to people. So now we're looking at, okay, we have a physical model that's expanding, and not necessarily organically, and how are our organics going to fit into it? We have a nucleus, and a very strong nucleus now downtown again, and which we would think that radial pattern. And we have a river system, and we kind of go off of those river systems. But now with the infrastructure in the northeast quadrant, a lot of infrastructure around the whole south, definitely the southwest, bigger than a quadrant, and then now directly west with Apple out there. A lot of that was going to happen organically no matter what. But all of a sudden we have this ability to kind of infill those areas. So it's more of an observation of, well, let's see what happens and how that kind of infills in between all these big spots now.
Yeah, exactly.
Would that ultimately keep prices lower?
I don't think prices are, the immediate price tomorrow, as Aimee said, look, if you're going to buy 100 acres next to Apple, well, there's 2,000 acres of comps. Now it's just relative to whether your 100 acres should be more expensive than those 2,000, but those comps exist. So it matters today for that value. It doesn't, I don't think it matters over, there are thousands of acres. If there were 200 acres and that was it, of course, then we set the standard as going goes up from there. I don't know that the value is necessarily affected long-term there, but the value is affected long-term. We saw it before the downturn, 10, 12 years ago now. What you saw was these values went up. And then there was a point, and we were right at probably the breaking point. Well, other factors broke before we had to figure out how to make land cheaper again.
Yeah.
We're probably near that point where it's as expensive as it needs to be on any one project, standpoint. But the thing is, the numbers are about where they were then. So I think that it controls itself probably a little bit naturally. It's the one project where, the neighbor sold for this and so on, we're going to get more those are the things, and if that has to be the piece, you're going to pay a premium to the point that it can afford it. But I don't think it's right.
When you look at 2008 and the lead up to that, what is different potentially? In this case, are prices back to that?
Yeah, but prices aren't what broke.
Correct.
What broke was well, a lot of national factors. Yeah, I'll give you the one. I'm not going to give you the one thing, right? But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things. But what's immediately different is businesses, whether it be a developer or anyone, is far less risky. You know, we're never going to get rid of the risk. I mean, any business endeavor is a risk, right? But it's completely, it's a lot different. And by and large, where some companies maybe they didn't change their practices at all, but there were a lot more entities that either don't exist or were forced that, look, you cannot do it this way. Right. You know, and land development by and large, real estate is the easy one to point your finger at, but because it's inherently risky. So I think people, nowadays walk in a little bit more. If you're going to do land development, make a subdivision. Well, are you going to go build 100 lots and hope to sell them, or are you going to get those 100 deals worked out, and then or 75 of them,
Right.
or whatever percentage? You're going to be a little more concerned about that business model. That's a benefit. And what's changed is we all have had the opportunity to experience 2000.
Right.
Before that, I was 7 in 1980. So the farm prices didn't hit me the same, hit my family members. But I didn't have an economic issue to go through like that. Now we've had it. So we have our reasons for reacting the way we do.
Simplistically, I think back before 2008, there were a lot of banks, developers, you name it, in the real estate industry that maybe felt like they were taking too much risk, but in order to compete and do any business, you had to take that risk because there was someone else who would have done it. And some people didn't change their practices. I would say the people who maybe resisted that a little bit and said, no, that's too much risk for me. I'm going to try and make the deals work that don't get me to that risk level, are the ones who survived, and the ones who said, you know what, everybody else is doing it, I'm jumping in, I'm going to make these deals, and so far it's worked out. Well, then when it stopped working out, and now, like Nick said, people have lived through that, and they understand that, hey, there were consequences to making those decisions, and I'm going to change how I do business because of that.
What would be an indicator that new people are starting to do that again, where they are taking on too much risk? Is there something you'd be looking for?
Well, I mean, the fundamentals of real estate are, it's not rocket science. There's, a return that you factor in your costs, you factor in your projected revenues, and the return you need. And I think, those are, and you figure out your risks from that. The problems where people were like, well, yeah, I'm going to make no doc loans, and I'm going to just assume it all works out well. And I mean, those were, if you stick with the fundamentals, that really is, you're going to be fine. And people weren't doing that then.
Right. If you have a sector that struggles, though, does that just, like retail, for example, does that create a new opportunity, a different development opportunity, or does that upset the apple cart with those fundamentals?
That's how I see it. If you were to ask me where I think the next opportunities lie, surely we've milked the multifamily market, as far as we can. But the failing strip center is an area that, and the big box retailer is just ripe to me for rethinking in an innovative way. Des Moines, if it has a weakness in my perspective, one of them is we're really limited with our entertainment and shopping choices. We've got the East Village, a little bit of something there at Valley Junction, a little bit of something at Beaverdale, and then the big mall experience. And lots of retail spaces that are pretty marginal and needing to be reinvented. So how we reinvent those retail spaces, they're big, simple building forms. How do we reinvent them in a multitude of uses?
I have a question for you. The sort of the encouragement to put retail on the first floor of a multifamily project.
Yes.
Misdirected?
Well intended, But you know, how many coffee shops do you need in a 1 mile area? So I think certainly the goal of activating our streetscapes and making them very visible and public is a good goal to work hard at. The nature of the retail and the shape of that retail, though, I think we need to be sure that we're not forcing developers to do something that really doesn't work in the marketplace. So far, there's been a few projects, I think, where we've maybe pushed a little too hard on that. But for the most part, I think it's a matter of, again, being creative with design. Does the retail space have to be 60 feet deep? I don't think it does, you know. Why can't it be 20 feet deep and 60 feet wide? And so you have all that activity on the streetscape for a fraction of what it was going to take before.
So just 1 second.
Yeah.
We'll have to check that.
We're gonna
We'll do some.
I know.
I know.
When you hear the first year we did this, we were re-roofing.
Yes.
And
Oh, no.
And the Prosperity
And
Express. is
and
what
Hy-Vee
it
was
said.
going, and Hy-Vee was
rolling
going.
through every 15 minutes.
So we're used
Yeah.
to this.
And Hy-Vee was going in.
Yeah, it's it's an economic indicator, that's what I mean.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
All right, I'll catch you up.
But so I think we need to be reasonable. When we were doing the Bridge District, for instance, there was a little bit of push that says, you know, can't you get some first floor retail integrated? And we said, you know, we're a block away from the East Village. Why, you know, should we compete with that? It's very easy walking distance. So I think that's a good example. The fact that the apartments are walk-up flats, so people have front doors and patios on the streetscape, helps reduce that lack of retail. On the suburban aspect, I mean, these sites are huge, with huge parking lots that were designed for parking standards from the 60s. And so there's lots of flexibility to infill and get clever with all those parking lots. Even retail spaces that are currently working, I think, you drive by and half the parking lot's empty. You know, surely there's economic value there that we're missing.
You bring up an interesting point, because Curtis and Urbandale, you just lost a potential use for empty space around Hay Mall, in part because of the alignment of the street.
Right.
I mean, it kind of boiled down to that a little bit. Who needs that street and that parking lot, I guess, in this day and age?
Right. Well, I mean, I think when you look at that Roman Wall site, as Dennis was saying, how do you think creatively about those spaces? I know one of the comments that came up is, where will the children who live in this apartment complex play? And you know, you couldn't help but think when you were sitting in the audience, what if you had the opportunity to redo that entire site? I mean, I think that's exactly what you're talking about. Is rather than lot, ring road, parking lot, what else might have been done? And so, you know, I think there were multiple things that came together to make that not a good fit for that site in the staff, planning, and zoning commission, and ultimately city council's eyes. But how do you reuse all that pavement and think it through in a different way?
Well, in the large shopping mall example, it can be very difficult to look at those holistically because, you know, the remaining tenants you have, a lot of times you're governed by anchor tenant agreements that restrict what you can do with ring roads and parking and those different things. I mean, it isn't just hey, well, let's just start over and see what we think should happen.
Because you have to wonder, why not? If that's what it takes to make it work.
And you know, it's not impossible to negotiate back through those, but it's very, very difficult.
Absolutely. You have to kind of get to a certain level of failure before the opportunity provides it.
Right.
It's just a different model of why it's very hard to a lot of redevelopment in neighborhoods is difficult, because there's no one point where Detroit probably has the only example of where we had or how many acres, blocks and blocks and blocks of people that just left. And it's amazing from an urban planning standpoint, but you don't have that ability to get those residents that they're there, that's home, or whether it be a business resident or not, whether it's a mall or a block on the neighborhood down the street here. And then, you might wonder, that's where, we get into that price thing, it's just, there's value there that you can't overcome sometimes.
Let's back up to multifamily for a minute too. Are you folks hearing from people? Is that on the, how far are we away from kind of working out the excess?
Well, there seems to continue to, even in markets where we feel like it'd be oversaturated for us to come in as a owner and developer and, hold something long-term, we're still seeing interest from people and we're still making land sales in those. And, maybe it's just a little different risk-return profile or, there's a variety of different things that can drive that. But if you read nationally about the number of, housing units we need to create, and again, that's not localized, but just on a national basis, I guess I don't see how multifamily can really taper off that much for us to be able to provide that much supply.
That point right there is the bigger thing. We're growing people worldwide, no matter what we're talking about here. And for one reason or another, they have to be coming here quite a bit. We're always going to need more residential units, places to live, whether that be a single-family home, an apartment. From a land use, from a planning standpoint, we better always be creating each use, not just whatever's trendy or what everybody's less annoyed with today. Or look, we're going to build a city and have all parts. So you have to have apartments. You have to have that townhome or whatever that mid-density unit is. And you have to have a single family. And hopefully we improve our single family model. Maybe we have some big parks next to smaller lots versus a park in the backyard. We'll chase that. But if you look at, the freshest number in my mind is Aimee, who expects to be 100,000 a lot sooner than many of us thought they would be. I worked there 18 years ago, and it was 30,000 people. Now they're well above 60. So if you look about how many units that is in our metro, a relatively small metro for the growth that we see, there's hardly any way short of a big economic issue that's going to change that pattern of needing to have a lot of progressive growth.
I was out
Because
there
people
for
are
an
gonna
interview
need
last
places
week,
to live.
so took the opportunity to try. There's a lot of land to develop.
Well,
in Prairie Trail alone, but
Right.
also
Yeah.
beyond. I mean, there's still a lot of beautiful land.
Our metro by and large has a lot of, it gets more interesting and challenging when you go south by the river.
Right.
Thank gosh.
Well-
People are going to see the bumpy parts of our area too.
And speaking about how, infrastructure has been driving development, you do have, like the whole Highway 5 bypass, that infrastructure has been in for a long time, and for whatever reason, I think a large part of what happened is General Growth decided to build, right when they finished all that, General Growth decided to build a mall at Jordan Creek, which I think shifted a lot of focus and demand to that area. But, there is a lot of available land still out there, and that is one reason I think, development in Des Moines has stayed at, while prices increase,
Still tough.
it's still somewhat measured.
If you're going to anticipate looking to the next 3 to 5 years, push it out a little bit and think about land prices, what do you think we could expect in the Des Moines market?
I don't think we're going to see a large fluctuation in land prices. You like to think everything follows the farm values, but it is relative. By and large, if we're going to go out 10 miles, then that's absolutely true. But in our case, the only place is if it's that one spot down the street downtown. Yeah, that's going to change because those are getting fewer and fewer. But as your idea of what is downtown, there's no real limit there either. It's just what we all thought of it because we've been here a while. It's another half mile that way or that way. So there is a real reason in my mind that it's going to have a dramatic effect in that short term.
Is the approach to developing in the suburbs different as opposed to just creating a neighborhood with a gazillion X number of houses? Do you focus more on amenities and a neighborhood retail strip and that kind of thing? Does that factor into all of it?
Well, I think every property or every area we look at is different. I mean, if you're developing something that is right behind the Hy-Vee and Waukee versus something that's, you know, kind of out in the outer reaches of Urbandale where there isn't any sort of, you know, there isn't a Casey's or a Come and Go or anything out there versus, you know, where we're looking at the new area for, you know, Raccoon River. Those are all, you're going to approach all of those a little bit differently. It certainly does come into mind. I mean, one of the things we think about as we're looking at opening up a new area is, you know, if someone wants to go get a gallon of milk, you know, how far are they going to have to go? And even if it is only 5 or 10 minutes, some of it can be perceived distance
How
as
many
well.
convenience stores in this greater Des Moines?
So then the question is, okay, well, you know, the area we're looking at really doesn't make a lot of sense for convenience stores when you think that in, you know, next year, they're going to have the intersection of Grand Prairie Parkway and Veterans Parkway constructed. So that makes more sense. You know, those are all factors that kind of we look at. You know, parkland, we don't get to make those decisions unilaterally. The cities weigh in on those. And a lot of times the trend now is to try to create, maybe have 3 different landowners contribute and create sort of a larger piece because a lot of cities can't afford to maintain, you know, 30 different small parks when they could combine those all into 5 larger regional parks that still provide access to the neighborhood.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think cities are trying to meet developers halfway too. And so one example is out in northwest Urbandale, we are building one of our streets as a complete street. And some people might look and say, well, this is, you know, this isn't in the dense part, but we wanted to get started. And a part of it is responding to the people who are investing in those neighborhoods, to the developers who are making investments out there, and saying, we understand that you want a distinct place. And so couple that with Walnut Creek Regional Park, and now a road that can handle both vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles.
I imagine it's easier to put the complete street in too before neighbors are in the
Right.
in the
You're
area.
exactly
might have
right.
consumption.
You're exactly right. And then that gives us an opportunity to see how it works and then build out a complete streets plan for the whole city.
We have about just about 5 minutes or so. And one of the things I always like to do towards the end is just open it up and if there's something we haven't talked about specific that you think would be a good topic for us to still touch on today. So.
One of the things, whether you love it or hate it, that drives a lot of demand is tax abatement and some of those things. So I think in any discussion about land development, maybe that's a good topic to touch on. We certainly do see, and I think like Adele is a good example of, they put in a pretty robust tax abatement program. They got exactly the results that you could expect from that, where they had a lot of growth in the city. And, you know, I think they ended up thinking, okay, how do we manage that growth, and how long do we want to continue that tax abatement? You know, that's one of the topics we really see that can impact demand, I guess, kind of make a quick sort of silver bullet. Now, obviously, that comes with its implications as well.
Tax abatement, I think we saw that with everything, it's an act and react, and the harder you act, the harder you react. As far as the pendulum swinging, you know, when you adjust those measures, but it does have an immediate impact on the end user. And when the end user gets that immediate impact, if it's $3,000 or $6,000 a year, I mean, that's a big number to most folks. And so that is incentive to get them to turn right instead of left, depending on which direction they're going.
And act quickly.
You know, yeah, and with the outlying towns, we know we work off the organic growth in the, you know, our golden circle, or whatever we want to call it. The further you get out, you know, the further you need to incent. And we're unique in that we have a pretty tight group of golden circle, but now that it's growing, there are bigger outlier towns that are, you know, whether manufacturing's affected them or whatever reason, that they're kind of standing out on their own. So we're going to see more of that come as to get the folks to drive another 15 minutes. It'll take some.
That's an interesting point when you think of, say, Adele or Winterset, which at some point we're going to be a part of the metro area, and their biggest asset, in my opinion, is placemaking. They have a town square. And that's, again, back to what can we do today to make places between here in Urbandale or here in Winterset, so that as we develop these communities, they're not monolithic
Right.
product types, but they actually offer a place, a sense of place. I think that's the big challenge for those growth vectors. For our older established neighborhoods, to me, I think the ability to continue to have growth through strategic infill, accessory dwelling units is something I really love, which is the mother-in-law flat. And our house that we have on 51st.
What was the term?
Accessory dwelling unit, ADU, or granny flat, they call them.
That's
That's
what
where
you're
you put
talking
granny.
about,
That's
right?
where my great-grandfather lived in Blue Springs, Missouri. It was above the garage back in the alley. We had one here off of 51st Street, which was really great. And so it's a way for a homeowner to have an additional housing option, rent income, but you have to be really careful how you manage things like parking and density, safety, noise. But I think some policies that really help that
I think
infill.
Minnesota has really looked.
It's been a big issue with their comp plan, yeah. Mhm.
No, I think is so interesting about this is that the local policymakers do send signals to the marketplace. So a revision of a code that allows for an ADU signals to the market, doesn't say you must build this, but
Yeah.
signals to the market, we'd like a tax abatement out in the areas you're talking about, signals to the market, we're open. Urbandale's office incentive is, we've made investments of tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure, and the signal is there is a time, and that time is now, to make investments. So it is interesting how policy can help to gently nudge the market in one direction or another, as you talked about that end user.
Well, and we talked about the better way to do things. In our paradigm is more suited right now in our metro anyway to look at that next best way to live. We've been, we're 20 years into whatever mixed-use neighborhood you want to call out. We've got a few in our bigger metro area, including Ames, of where we've tried to get that paradigm shifted, and I think we're on our way where it's becoming more normal. So we as in developers maybe can start creating something a little more unique because it's palatable.
Yeah. And bankers will give you money to do it.
Yeah, they understand it
Yeah.
better. And
Yeah.
it's critical. So,
Yeah.
and it ultimately, I think, we're going to be able to create some real neighborhoods and do a little better job.
Quick follow on Adel. What has happened in Adel since it?
I don't know the current numbers myself. I don't doubt there's some shift. There likely have to be. If it worked, there's likely to see fewer numbers of permit starts, but I don't know that. So, it's very recent, so.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
they
shift
worked out
this
sort
year.
of a phased
Right.
sort of agreement with people who had made investments in the community already, who still had flats to finish out. But yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting. I know year-end numbers just came out from the HBA, but I didn't look at that one specifically.
I think that just about does it for time. I'm sure we could keep on talking for a long time, but I appreciate our audience for following along as well today. Again, my name is Chris Conetzkey. I'm the publisher of the Business Record. Our best story ideas and the things that Kent is going to write about and our team is going to write about always comes from our audience. And so if something today spurred a story idea and you think you want to get in touch with us, Kent's contact information will pop up on the screen there. Feel free to reach out to him or to myself. And also a big thank you to our panelists today. I appreciate everything that you did and for helping with the conversation. Again, if I can ever be of help, feel free to reach out my way. Thank you for watching.